Hello. Welcome to the Monday Morning Report. And in this video, I'm going to introduce you to a self-contained plasma reactor, which has been a dream of scientists the world over. Right now, they have to spend millions, if not billions, of dollars to manipulate small amounts of matter and do plasma reactions and study it. It's strictly limited to very high voltage situations. To have something that doesn't even have a voltage source powering it, producing self-contained plasma reactions is a dream of them all, but currently they can't acknowledge this particular technology for reasons that should be obvious to you now if you've seen my other videos. But I'm going to reinforce and validate that claim. And it will also enable us to control the climate, which of course is like a loaded gun. It can be used for good or bad. It will depend on who has the technology, which is one of the reasons why I think everybody needs to have this technology. Frankly, this should have been written into the Constitution as a right that supersedes even that of owning guns in the U.S. But that's my take on things because, frankly, obviously the power to destroy the planet is already in the hands of idiots, and it's just a question of time when they'll use that, and this would enable people to actually survive and resist that kind of craziness. Quite frankly, at least I think it has the potential to do that. We'll have to see. But the only way it's going to really benefit us is to give it to everybody. And, we have to more or less abandon this idea of giving ultimate power to only a few who can afford it. That's just not smart, especially with the changes that are coming. So, here are three quotes by Nikola Tesla, or at least attributed to him. I honestly believe they probably are his words, um, if not directly, because some of these sentences seem too short. He definitely wrote the first one, and that's one sentence. And to see multiple sentences in the second two kind of gives me suspect that maybe he didn't write them. But I'll take it on the sources that are on the internet that he did, because I happen to agree with them. And we'll see. Certainly how this plays out. But it gives me hope that this is not a fool's journey, that in investing in this research and development program will in fact be rewarded handsomely. And so I want to encourage people, and most upper class people in the U.S. actually probably have funding available to do this research on their own. Certainly, high school students can do it, but it makes more sense to properly engage organizations that have more or less an unlimited budget and the talent on hand to explore this, if they're willing to give up their existing science beliefs and acknowledge that this is a gift that needs to be exploited. So let's get into it. All right, here's the man. If you don't recognize him, that's a shame. You just don't know. This is Paul Pantone. In the 80s is when this photograph, well, the video that this was clipped from, um, was made. It's up on YouTube. Don't know the address. You'll just have to look for it. But he invented this thing called, he named it the GEET reactor, which is an acronym for Global Environmental Energy Technology. And the version that I heard of this recording mentioned that it was a really good day. And it may not have been this recording in which this quote is in, but he said it was a great day when I realized that I could run an engine on root beer. So he later discovered it could run on anything, including polluted water or seawater. Something the Navy has claimed they've been able to do a couple of times, but their process is secret, and their process also involves some very expensive materials. Paul's process is made out of plumbing parts and a short little steel rod. So not exactly a budget limiting invention. Um, it is self-powered in a sense if it runs an engine and the engine creates a vacuum. That's what powers the reactor. And the two devices, the engine and the reactor, exchange energy in a novel way that enables it to run as long as you keep it fueled. Um, I believe that it actually could be run, well, it transmutes materials, so it does require matter of some sort to operate. Um, but I believe that it could be configured in a way to produce enough matter to sustain a reaction. Um, that's my thought. That hasn't been demonstrated. It has been demonstrated that the exhaust or the product that comes out of this, which happens to be clean air and water, um, can be recycled into the fuel mix and run the machine even more, a longer length of time. But anyway, uh, that's getting ahead of myself here. So let's take a look at uh, Paul and his life so that we can actually see where he was at and how he did this. Okay. All right. Paul. Paul never graduated high school. He quit school after the ninth grade. He just got too frustrated by the craziness that was going on and what they were teaching, because he grew up raised by a single mom who didn't have enough money to feed them. Occasionally, they were dumpster diving, and she really impressed upon him to use his observational skills and literally trained him to become self-reliant at an early age. And self-independent, reliant people uh, really can't stay in school the way it's taught today, because they just see so much craziness being, told. If they really wanted to be successful, they knew they'd have to get out of there and hit the streets, and that's what Paul did. So he really appreciated in the 80s the fact that there was all this press happening about the world being polluted, and so he wanted to improve the fuel efficiency of an internal combustion engine, and essentially make a carburetor, if you will, that you could slap on a car and eliminate the toxic waste that comes out the tailpipe. Also increase the fuel efficiency of it. So that was his goal. He had to accomplish both those to achieve success. He worked on it for years, throwing together everything he could into a package that would create what he thought was the optimal burning conditions, including aligning it with the North Pole, because he knew that that would have an effect that would increase fuel efficiency. And the combination of everything, actually, he was successful. So not only did he succeed, he created a self-contained plasma reactor, and got the engine to run on that plasma reaction, reconstituting the plasma that he generated in his reactor into a finished form that was actually beneficial and supported the environment on the planet. Essentially, he made a terraforming device that would turn toxic atmosphere into livable, breathable atmosphere, and produce water, which is the secret to life-sustaining activities on the planet, and also um, other things that happen that science denies still today, but have been proven by other people who have, such as Stan Myers. Um, so let's keep going here. So um, for 30 years, Paul resisted all attempts to change him and divert him from his goal of actually perfecting a carburetor for automobiles, which is, in his opinion, the biggest source of pollution on the planet. And he, in the process, of course, he never perfected that because of all the work that was and effort and money that was spent by the existing organizations to prevent him from being successful and preserving the economy. And it couldn't rightly be argued that it is something that is necessary for our national defense, or actually the defense of the planet. We would be driven into a economic collapse worldwide with the release of free energy across the planet just willy-nilly, and especially as cheap and as trouble-free as building these devices are. Um, of course, Paul didn't buy into that. He really just wanted to make a fair return for what he was doing and compete openly in the market with those guys. If his stuff was better and people chose it over theirs, then he thought, let the chips fly where they and land where they will. But that's not reality. Reality is that it will break the economy. So that cannot be the purpose of this program that we're initiating, because it will not succeed. It will, without the cooperation of nations and governments all allowing these technologies to have limited deployment for the purposes that we're defining here, we will not be successful, and people will die. And quite frankly, one of the reasons why I brought all this information to you in the way that I have is to allow you to have access to the information that will convince you that these things are possible and that it needs to be done. So the fact is our geomagnetic field is collapsing. We will be subject to flares that will destroy life on the planet, starting with our technology. In February of this year, the nation of Brazil, that lives under the South Atlantic anomaly, did lose power. And they lost power in a brand new portion of their electrical grid that was underpowered at the time, um, and shut down power to tens of millions of people. And the official report was essentially the whole system just collapsed. But it happened to collapse at a time when satellites were being knocked out of communications with the planet and in that same region. And essentially that's a weak spot that is growing in our shield, and now currently covers most of South America and most of Southern Africa. So it's going to get worse as the shield collapses to that level. It will show up first, of course, in the anomaly, which is a fact of life. That's the way things are. So when those things fail, I believe that certainly Brazil would really like to have some sort of shield that they could put over their major transformer stations and other areas that were compromised and prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, with a weak enough field and a large enough flare, the wires themselves in that grid will become subject to inductive loads, which similar to the Carrington event that took out the telegraph system that spanned the United States, which shocked operators and operated without power, even though it was disconnected for some time. That particular event did not, as far as I know, create fires, but fires have been created in transformers with this kind of activity in the past, because they couple that energy even more efficiently than wires do. So the ferromagnetic materials in the cores are extremely susceptible to this kind of inductive behavior, which is why we put them in motors and generators. Okay, seeing this connection between the spheres or planetary operations and Tesla's coil or his transformers also gives us insights into other technologies that can be leveraged out of this device, which are really mind-blowing. So that's what we know. That's what we know. So let's let's get on with telling effects here. So Paul told me the story about how by sheer accident they started generating tornadoes off of his reactor, and the book goes into detail of what they look like and how they connected between the Earth and the reactor. So essentially, the storm systems that we have, especially the big ones on the planet, are an electrical phenomenon that is generated by the connection between the Earth and space, outer space. And those differentials that create, especially in the massive hurricanes, are exactly the same as tornadoes, only bigger, for hurricanes, smaller for tornadoes. But that phenomenon, it can easily, demonstrate that the GEET reactor is acting as the as a sub planet in its function. So the planet is, you can relate the two and identify that the model, because of the fractal nature of the universe, actually the reactor is a planetary model. And there are other things that Paul did while he was messing around with this modified GEET, and perhaps even an unmodified GEET at very high speeds produces these same effects. The way he wrote his book, it's not clear, but one or the other is definitely real and happens. So as you crank up the power on these GEET reactors, which is simply blowing more material through it at a faster rate, that's all it is, or maybe not blowing, perhaps the more accurate term would be sucking, but it's the same thing, just turn it around. When you do that, you replicate not only weather systems with, if there's enough humidity, but you replicate auroras such as the borealis at both ends of, and Australia, at both ends of the planet, that is replicated on the reactor itself. Crank it up more, and you get the electrical phenomenon that's happening above the atmosphere, which is sprites and things like that, of which Paul, stuck his finger in most of the stuff, and he said that actually kind of tickled. It didn't really hurt you. It doesn't really burn you. That's a different kind of electrical discharge than the lightning strikes, which he was able to also replicate, that happen in the atmosphere. Now those, he said, those burn. You want to keep your hands out of that. The guy's, he's very hands-on. Um, but so he cranked that up, and then he actually got it to glow very, very white, like we see the sun. In terms of, he didn't do a spectral analysis, so we can't really say what the spectral discharge was, but very similar to sunlight. I presume that it doesn't have a lot of high UV in it, because he did not note that it made him blind or partially blind, which I think he would have realized, unless, of course, he was wearing eye protection, which would have been a smart move. But who knows? Uh, and if you crank it up even more, it does something that I've written about here. But essentially, it turned itself invisible, which might really freak somebody out to hear this thing, going at supersonic speeds almost. I mean, his engine's running away at high speeds far beyond the maximum speed limits of the engine normally. And on some engines, one converted car that ran at super high speeds actually destroyed the drivetrain. So he felt at risk of running at this high, and only did it for a short while. But when the thing disappeared, that freaked him out. That crossed the line. He didn't put his finger in that. But if he had told me about this phenomena, I could have explained what had happened, and put it in perspective, because this is the true vision of space. If you go out there without the appropriate filters, or enough atmosphere between you and the stars, they are all invisible to our naked eye. Space is a black void. And I suspect that was really the problem with the Hubble telescope, until they put the right filters on it to enable the telescope to actually see, the sensors to react to the light that's coming into that space-based telescope above the atmosphere. But again, that's speculation. Let's stick with the facts. The fact is that the first astronauts that went into space actually confessed and told that you can't see the stars. Everything's dark. It's black. There's no sun, and you can't really orient to anything. You can't guide yourself by the stars with your visual eye. You have to rely on the reflected light of the planets and the Earth and the Moon for illumination in that regard. Which man, that's just so telling. I mean, this is why NASA can't confirm it. There would be no shadows on the moon if you were on it in space. The only light comes from the moon itself, so everything would be lit from the bottom up, and from this, the landscape that surrounds it. Man, oof, sorry about that. Didn't expect to go there, but hey, that's the way it is. So never a straight answer, from NASA. Is not only for the reason of suppressing the science behind this that could corrupt the economy, but also for busting them as faking it. They faked it, and the fact that there are shadows on the moon when you're on the moon is the reason why. There are shadows on the moon from where the light is reflected, of course, for a distant observer. But when you're on the moon, the stuff that you're photographing, like a space module, would be lit from below, not from the sunlight hitting it. Although you would get that too, because it would reflect the light, but you wouldn't see shadows, would you? Huh. Maybe you would. Maybe you would. So think about it. Of course, if it's reflecting light, then it's going to have a shadow behind it. But the fact that the whole moon is lighting surface wherever the sunlight is clearly the only light source that would be visible. So that would totally change how those shadows react, because shadows are different when they're backlit, obviously. So so it would change how those shadows are manifested, and the photographs don't conform to that. They conform to a single solitary light source illuminating everything, as opposed to the other effect, which is all the light that's reflected becomes visible light at that point, and so that would also illuminate things. It's a different kind of picture. At least I think so. Maybe I'm wrong. It could be. Like I said, this just came over me, and I'm going to leave it in because we really need to start thinking about how the real world is and what things happen. But as this reactor gets up enough energy and puts out enough of this different second kind of electrical energy, that Paul measured. I mean, his 1.5 horse motor that was operating at normal speed, produced tens of kilowatts of power in terms of voltage and current, which he could measure independently, but he didn't know how to tap into it. So he wasn't able to wrap a coil around the reactor and collect it. That doesn't work. But Tesla had simple, capacitive plates that would pick up the energy and generate very high voltages. So clearly, a simple antenna, a broad-based antenna that has multiple frequencies built into the design, is the way to harvest that energy and then route it with a single wire device. Very simply done. But then it, of course, needs to be stored perhaps in a capacitor and then recycled or redistributed in a way that's useful. Which capacitors can do. They can discharge power and be circuits developed that control that discharge, as opposed to the open just constant bombardment that would be broadcast by this thing and just continue to build up until literally the capacitor would explode. Um, all right. So moving on, and in fact, Edwin Gray, patented a device that he proved worked, which of course he never got to commercialize. He died, strangely enough, shortly after it was recognized that what he had was real. His circuits, and Peter Lindemann has a great video discussing how most of his circuit was all about dissipating the excess power he generated with a simple spark gap. That was all he had, was one little spark gap, and collected more energy off that than he could use, and ran in, as he called them, inductive loads, because this thing generated so much current just from the spark gap, which is an effect that Tesla realized, which is why he understood this to be a type of electricity that is lossless as it travels through space. It picks up more energy, which is how uh, you know millions of light years of space can be crossed by energy put off by stars that clearly are not transmitting transverse waves. Obviously not. They're transmitting this other kind of energy that the GEET reactor ended up generating. So there we have it. Ah, it's so good. It feels good. And man, I can't keep this under half an hour. Sorry, not. I've got too much passion about this stuff. It's really exciting for me. I hope you catch the fire though. That's the important thing. I mean, I'm not giving you the information to do it. You're going to have to chase it down. But and I, what I hope to do is get people enough fired up to take this to the next level and broadcast what they discover, so that everybody can literally just go down to the hardware store, and with if they don't have the tools, with a few $1,000s, get the tools and the parts that you need to start building these things, and putting up shielding around your home, on your property, on your farm, or at least building, getting government agencies to buy in and start building networks of these things and distributing them in places of cities where we don't have the opportunity to relocate millions of people in the next few years before these destructive events start happening. So they have to be protected now, and work it into the economy. Um, trade one kind of fee for another, tax people appropriately, and deliver this kind of service free, or license it or whatever, but charge enough so that and employ people that will be losing their jobs. Start training those people and pulling them out of the industries in a controlled fashion. But first, you have to set up the protection to enable the people to remain alive. Um, so let's make that happen. Moving ahead, the future's ours. Governments are in place to keep things status quo. They will not do this unless we force them to. And just as you see, gun laws, are finally beginning to take shape in this country, and um, make make the government be responsible for how guns are distributed, and because clearly individually we are not. We have too many irresponsible people out there who are willing to take and abuse that right to bear arms. So the government needs to take charge of this, but not hinder the development. It has to allow it to be open source. It is something that needs to come down in that way to enable us to take full advantage, both to protect our lives, but also to set ourselves free from the tyranny of discrimination and exploitation. That is a right that we all must acknowledge as ours, but only one that we can have if we are responsible for that technology too. even more responsible than guns, because the power of this to change weather certainly is out there. Of course, it could become a guerrilla war. I mean, these things, will devolve among people that still think they need to compete for resources when, in fact, they're available to all. They're naturally free and abundant. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes, but we have no choice but to do it this way now, because it's too late to wait for one single organization to try to make these breakthroughs. It's just not going to happen. Finally, good luck. Um, I'm willing to be a point man on this and spread the word, but I am just a small part of the network, and one person can't be responsible for it all. It has to be distributed among many. So um, they say WhatsApp says it's secure communications. I suggest that we use that for until we get the government buy-in that we need, and spread this information around as quickly as possible to everybody. Get it out there. These are my other contact ways. Keep in mind that look in early November for a devastating flare, but stay abreast of these of the websites that I've advocated on YouTube. Hopefully they'll be continue to remain, and we can take advantage of that service, so we can find out where the damage is hitting first and next. Hopefully we'll clue that in. Suspicious observers is really tuned into the geomagnetic effect and the situation there. So they know it's coming. They know and have a series of videos that will give you a heads up of what it takes to create the damage. And quite frankly, we don't know all of what causes those geomagnetic storms, because they have happened and created damage on the planet in the past, and in limited degrees that didn't really make the news. But that's the way it is, and we don't know why, because it wasn't a huge solar flare that I'm predicting. It was some other combination of a gap in our shielding and just regular space weather coming to the planet. As the shield drops lower and lower, there's a high probability that we're going to have random events like that again that will impact the planet in very serious ways. So good luck. Live long and prosper, my friends. Peace. Um, love your brothers. We're all connected. And be good to each other. Take care. Good luck to us all.